any kind of support, including going to the toilet, eating or drinking, support with taking medicine. We have 3 volunteers in the fluorescent jackets, which are able to help us. If you can't find them, ask the ENIL team where they are. The quiet room is on the ground floor. One of the ENIL people can take you there. Let's see, I'm cutting this stupid thing. We're reminding speakers to speak slowly. I need to take that to heart. That's not I usually don't do so. Accessibility rules are included in the PowerPoint. The conference is streamed and recorded for those who are watching remotely. If they have questions, they should email them to ENIL after the Freedom Drive, and we will aim to get back to everyone. Coffee breaks will be outside of the conference room. Lunch will be served downstairs at the restaurant. There will be 2 buffets, so people should spread out. After the Freedom Drive, we would like everyone to complete the feedback form, which can be found on the Freedom Drive website. This is important for us and for our funders, so please remember to do so. So that's the housekeeping rules, and I see we almost have a full conference room. Let's see. But there's a few people missing. Charlie's not here, right? I don't see him.
The minister is coming later?
This one should be here. But we may start with you and then go to them after. What do you think? I said I'll start. No, here we have. Hello. Jamie Bolling. Hi. Nice to meet you. What's your name? Elke.
Hello, Theresia Degener. Nice meeting you.
So today we're talking about rebuilding the independent living pillars. We are people who want equality. We're citizens, we're not patients. We don't want our friends locked into institutions, and we are the experts of our own lives. And in order to live these lives, we need our pillars. We need accessible housing, transport, employment, information, access to our societies in general, technical aids. But all of these will be, not all of these, but on some of these we'll be touching as the morning goes on. And with that, I've done a first introduction, and we have Charlie coming up here on the ramp, who will take over from me. Before we go on with the schedule, we are going to play the video from Heba Hagras a little bit late today, or you'll be receiving it in your mailbox. This will save us some time in the morning. And then after that, we have several speakers, which I think you've seen on your program. We can introduce them as we go on. So please, Charlie.
I'm always one for being on time. Thank you, everyone. It's really nice to see you all today. As I recognize that I also gave a somewhat closing speech last night, so just in order to kind of bookend everything, it's nice to be involved today as well. I think what I wanted to touch on, especially as I approach this morning and we start thinking about the things that our other speakers are going to be talking about, is the... Sorry, I need to catch my breath. One second. Recording. I think the one thing I wanted to touch on really was the importance of framing and how we tell our stories about disability. Because actually, if we start to think about things not necessarily more positively, but we tell people about the positive change that things like personal assistance, deinstitutionalisation, the realisation of independent living and choice and control, if we talk about the change that that would positively make to our lives, then often people are more likely to want to support our message. Now, this isn't to say that we should say or paint everything as rosy and shiny and brilliant, because we all know that it's not. Our day-to-day experiences are full of disableism and ableism, where we are made to feel like we are less. However, if we think about the positive opportunities for storytelling within this, we can ultimately change the narrative of how we think about disability, and therefore how we talk about disability as well. I work with a number of young disabled people, and I support them into employment. And the one key question that we often ask people is, what are the barriers you are experiencing, and what are the solutions that you need? Because ultimately, we are the experts in our own lives. We know the things that we need in order to live more effectively with more choice and control. In terms of positive framing and positive, when we think about the climate change movement, for example, if everyone told us all the time about climate change that it was all going to go to shit and everything was awful, then no one would have hope to try and change things. But if we can start telling that story of, look at these small changes, look at how less bleached the coral reef is this year as a result of these projects that were being done a few years ago, or look at the impact that we've made on reducing deforestation, that gives people hope. And I think that we should be thinking along the same lines when we talk about our stories and the disability movement and what it means to us and the opportunities for positive change and ultimately more human rights. Thank you.
Hope. Fantastic. That's what we need. So thank you for that message, Charlie. I don't know if I presented you, the ENIL Youth Network board member. So I forgot to say that, sorry. Okay, and the next on the list would then be, and welcome to you, Elke van der Brandt, the Minister for Mobility, Public Works and Road Safety. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Is the microphone on?
Yes.
Yes, okay. It's an honor to be here, and I say that not as a politeness, but it's true. I'm a local politician, so every time there's a congress in Brussels and I have the honor to speak, I say, welcome to Brussels, I hope you enjoy the city. But I know for you that the only way that I can truthfully say welcome to Brussels is when our city is truly inclusive and when our city is hosting everybody and you can join and feel our city without any obstacle on the way. And I'm very, very aware that that is not the case. So that's why I say I'm grateful and I'm honored to be here and also humble. Yesterday, I think for the 11th time in a row, you took the streets for the Freedom Drive, your protest march, which is clear call for all human rights as set out in the UN Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and it does not cease to be relevant. I hope one day we can say this is behind us, we go to a next one, but it still contains every single important element that we need. And I'm always impressed by the power of this Freedom Drive and by the loud volume. You're absolutely right to shout out injustices. Much more work remains to be done. And this year, the UN Committee on Rights of Persons with Disabilities received Belgium's Respect for the Rights of People with Disabilities together with the Belgian Human Rights Institute, UNIA. And the conclusions are crystal clear. Public buildings and public spaces, public transport, as well as the media, the internet, are still insufficiently accessible for all. In the event of an acute crisis or disaster, Belgium does not yet have a crisis management plan that takes people with disabilities into account. And also regarding support service for inclusion, schools or employment, our society fails in providing the basic infrastructure for independent living. And since 2019, I'm a Minister of Mobility. I'm at the end of my term. And 2 years ago, at the first time at the honor of being in this place, and it's an event that stayed with me. You have made such an impression on me by stating clear how much work Brussels needs to be done. You have people from all over Europe coming here, so you can compare, and you're very quite clear. You say Brussels is not doing well, and that hurts my heart because I do love my city and I want to be the best city. So it was quite clear, and your message has been heard, and it shouldn't be necessary to repeat it time after time. But I still want to say, because you're repeating it time after time, it is heard and it is important. And as a politician, I'm thanking you for the energy and the focus you're putting on all the struggles we still need to fight. So that's a great shout out to all of you. Our cities have too long been created from the minds of mainly able-bodied white men. The streets, the crossroads, the bus stops, the subways have been shaped for some people, but not for all. And correcting these historical mistakes and injustices, unfortunately, how important and urgent they are, they cannot be done in a few years. They take time, and we need to make a plan to make it work. And as the principle of handy streaming says, we have to think from disability perspective within all policies. Therefore, in my responsibilities for welfare and health, which I also have, we are fighting to make sure that children and young people with disabilities can equally participate, for example, in holiday activities, on playgrounds, basic elements where children can be children, and making sure that all children can be children. We've worked on community centers to make them accessible, using the expertise of people with disabilities to organize truly inclusive activities. But we still have a lot of work to do here in Brussels. A more inclusive Brussels, a more inclusive Europe, where independent living is as obvious as drinking water. That's where we need to go. And I'm going to take a sip of water with that. The climate crisis and the environmental pollution challenge are challenging us. And tackling the climate and environmental crisis, we must not, as I said before, we must not make the same mistakes as we made decades ago, shaping our cities for just a small group of people. And for us, ENIL's position paper on climate change and highlights the impacts of climate change particularly affect people with disabilities. And in times of big changes, of unexpected crises, what we need to use human rights as stepstones to take decisions to shape our future. And it's stating on the message of hope. We are in front of big crises and big changes, but we can use them to create this better world. And so let's do better, and it is possible, and make the crisis an opportunity to rethink patterns, to rethink habitudes, and to change for the better. And the movements for independent living have been saying this for years. I know that you have been shouting out this for years, and I want to thank you for that. Especially salute also the Brussels-based activists, and I don't want to specify certain people. Everybody in this room is important, but I know the impact Nadia had on my mindset and my thinking, so I still want to shout out to her as a co-chair of ENIL, but also an eco-warrior as well as an advocate for independent living. But I want to thank all of you for moving politicians into the right direction, for pushing the realization of human rights for all, for sharing your expertise and vision on moments like these. So I hope, and I thank you in that you have a really inspiring, encouraging, and energizing meeting. And I hope this conference can also be the moment to truly enjoy Brussels. But it is a nice city, and we want to make it more inclusive, and we have to, and we will make it more inclusive.
Thank you. Maybe some hope. We hope. It is our capital, and it is a difficult city, one of the most difficult in Europe to get around. So we're glad that you're aware, and we hope that there will be the changes. We know it goes slow. It goes too slow, unfortunately. But thank you for your message and your time with us. And from there, we move over to Theresia Degener, who is a human rights lawyer and the former chair of the CRPD Committee. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can I have my PowerPoint on? Yes, thank you. It's an honor for me to be here on the 35th anniversary of ENIL and of the Freedom Drive in ENIL. And my topic for the next 12 minutes is what is the legal basis for the right to independent living, and I feel like I don't really have to talk because everyone in this room knows the CRPD. And so I will talk a little bit about what we have achieved and what is still missing. And I start by the first slide, please. Next slide. What has been achieved? We all know that, and on this slide is a little bit of text, which I will talk about now, and two pictures. One is on the headquarters of the United Nations in New York, and then below you will find a photo of the room where we negotiated the CRPD from 2002 to 2006. You can see a room 4 in the headquarters and many people in there, and we were in the end of the negotiations, 900 people, more than 900 people in the room. And can you imagine how difficult it is with 900 people in the room, among them many lawyers from different countries, to find consensus on text? That's the most difficult thing I know because as a lawyer, I know how difficult it is to find consensus among 2 lawyers only. So we did a great achievement by adopting this incredible text of CRPD, which is the first human rights, new modern international human rights convention in the new millennium. It was the first convention which has been negotiated with the help of internet, and civil society has never been so involved in a making of a human rights treaty like the CRPD. There are many more firsts. I could go on forever, but this is a very big achievement, the text of the CRPD, and that we managed to achieve consensus, and you all know that the ratification rate is super high. We are, I think, the second highest ratification among the human rights treaties in a short time. Okay, most importantly, of course, is Article 19 to us, the right to independent living as a human right. And I think we all know the text. It has many subparagraphs, but the three important aspects of the human right to independent living are three things. One is the freedom to choose where and how to live in the community. There is no freedom to live in an institution. There is no freedom of choice regarding to that. Then the right to personal assistance and more other services we might need, but personal assistance is key. And the right to accessible local services. And these are the three important things. We do not only need disability-specific service. We also need access to the swimming pool, the libraries, and as the mobility minister has so wonderfully said, we need it. It is a problem that Brussels is one of the more inaccessible towns in Europe. And it's wonderful that we have a mobility minister here who said, it hurts my heart. I think that's another achievement, that we have ministers who say that now. What else? We have also to think about all the other articles we have to read together with Article 19. Article 19 is closely related to the right to legal capacity. And if we don't have the right to decide where we will live, if someone else can decide for us that we have to live in an institution, or that we have to go to a hospital, or that we are not allowed to go on holiday the way we want it, then we cannot exercise our right to independent living. It's totally related to Article 12, but also Article 14, the right to liberty. No one may be detained or imprisoned on the ground of disability. And we have a very large vision of prison. It might be an institution, it might be a psychiatric hospital, or whatever. And also Article 5, equality, Article 6, equal rights of disabled women. We need to read independent living also from a gendered perspective. Article 9 on accessibility, and I could go on. You know, there are at least 30 human rights in the convention. All these human rights are interrelated. Next slide, please. And on the next slide, it says what has been achieved. I go on, and you have two pictures. One is of Stig Langwart from Denmark, who is the main, who was the main motor and chair of the General Comment number 5, which we adopted on Article 19 in 2017. And below you have a picture of me and Adolf Ratzka and Jamie Bolling and Kapka Panayotava, who were there on the general day of discussion in April 2016, when we discussed what needs to be in a General Comment number 5, and it was really important that people from ENIL were there and helped us set the right tone into the General Comment. We also adopted a year before, or 2 years before, the guidelines on Article 14, which very clearly say that the CRPD puts an absolute ban on involuntary institutionalization and forced treatment, even in crises. And that is important because most countries, even those who are friends of the CRPD, still have mental health laws and guardianship laws in place, which say in case of danger to himself or to herself or himself and others, disabled people might be imprisoned. I'm not against imprisoning disabled people if they have broken the law, but they need to have the right and the same rights as everyone else in society. And if we are arrested as a civil as a civil right, we have the right to a lawyer, we have the right to be heard in front of the judge, and all these things. They are sometimes put in the mental health law, but to a much lower degree. So we have a substandard. And what we need is, I'm not fighting for prisons, but if we have prisons, they must be inclusive and accessible. And we need police officers who need to know how to deal with disabled people. And by the way, most of the prisoners are disabled anyway. It's just they have an invisible disability most of the time. But it is very important that disability-sensitive training is given to the people who are in charge and trained to be justice servants. And we need to be in the same field as everyone else when we lose our liberty rights. So Article 14 says, even in crisis, even if we are assumed to be dangerous for us and for others, we cannot be put just on the basis of our impairment into prison or psychiatric hospital or forced treatment. And that is very, very revolutionary. It's very difficult to put into practice. I know that. I have talked and taught many psychiatric doctors. They are very angry at us when we say that. They accuse us of negligence and letting people die and all that. But I have also met people who say, yes, we can do without force. Of course we can. We can protect people from dangerous behavior without force. We just need the resources. So let's think about making a more human society by putting the resources into the right place. So we have also the guidelines on deinstitutionalization, including an emergency of 2022, which were adopted during the corona crisis and pandemic, and all the experiences we learned from this pandemic as one of the first big catastrophes and crises, those which we will envision again, as the minister so rightly said. We put it down there, and we need to apply this knowledge in these guidelines to the next crisis. We need to learn that institutionalization is a death trap in crises, is worse than being institutionalized in times of peace and freedom. It is a death trap, and we need to find other ways. So what is still missing? Next slide, please. There is no picture, just a question mark and text, which will I tell you. We need an international ban on institutionalization and segregation. That is not clear. In many countries, it is still seen as protection and in our best interest to segregate us into special schools, sheltered workshops, or institutionalization. We need to have an understanding on an international level that institutionalization and segregation is bad as torture or other so-called jus cogens international laws, which is laws which applies even if a state hasn't ratified a certain treaty, because it is a common understanding in international law that we never ever want to have torture, and that it makes bad governments, it makes a bad human society if we apply torture. We need to have this a similar understanding about institutionalization and segregation. We need more strategic litigation, and we need where people who try to get out of institutions or sheltered workshops and get into the courts and the European Court on Human Rights, but also in front of the CRPD Committee, and fight for the right to independent living in courts, because judges have to learn too, and they learn best in cases. We need participatory deinstitutionalization. Deinstitutionalization, the very difficult word, is of no use if the disability community is not involved, and it needs to be the local community. We need to be part of that process. And it is a tough process, but without us, it will not work. People will land in the streets, and some people will get out, but many will be left behind. We need alternatives for disabled people with complex needs. We cannot let it happen that if we are working hard on deinstitutionalization, those people are left to their families. That's not fair. We need support for these people who have different ways to communicate and who have complex needs. And we must not leave these families behind. And we need a transformation of social services, which the EU Commission has accepted a long time ago. It is part of the flagship of the new disability strategy. But we need to think about what do we need to do? And I want to mention in this regard a very important report the last UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, Jared Quinn, has published in 2023. It is on transformation of services. And in this study, you find a long list of recommendations, what states can do. Very, very helpful. If you need like a list of demands you can give to your governments, go to that study and also get social service providers. My time is up. Involved and look at this list and see how can we work through this list in order to transform our social services. It's very tangible what's in there. It's thought through very well, and it's a very good scientific-based global study which we need to put into place. It's not easy. We need lawyers and economists and social policy makers for that. But it has a very good list, and it accommodates, or it helps us to put the pillars of independent living into place. And I want to close with the hope idea Charlie put into our head in the beginning, and it gives me hope that we have a minister in our ranks who says, it hurts my heart that this city is inaccessible. And I hope you stay. I know that you are at the end of your term, but people like you should stay in office and help us and understand, and you have understood very clearly that what we need to do with the crisis and we will still have to face in the future. And there are 3 Bs the United Nations has adopted in their Agenda 23. Build back better. That's what we need to apply, not only in the so-called developing countries, but we need to apply it in our own places. So thank you.
Thank you, Theresia. It's not easy to in a short time to summarize everything you said. But I will read the transformation of services in jail. The Quinn was a great idea, and that we do have hope. The COVID did show us that so many things aren't in place, and that it's easy to treat us very, very horribly when given the chance. So thank you for that. And now, much welcome to you, Helena Dalli, the Commissioner for Equality from the European Union. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, one moment.
And welcome to our 35th anniversary and the Freedom Drive again.
Yes, so good morning, and I'm very happy to be here with you today. At yesterday's Freedom March, you rallied together to send a strong message about the right to live independently and participate fully in society. And as you celebrate your 35th anniversary, I thank you for the role you played in affecting change. Without your action and voices, we would not be as far as we are on disability rights. As I emphasized at the Freedom Drive 2 years ago, I committed to bringing change. This has been at the core of my initiatives during this mandate. All citizens, without exception, should be empowered to make their own decisions, to develop talents, and to flourish in their private, educational, and professional lives. That is not yet the case, as we very well know. Key principles of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, to which the EU is party, aim at promoting full participation in political life, employment, education, culture, and leisure. The Convention affirms that persons with disabilities have an equal right to others to choose where and with whom to live and to participate in the community. The strategy for the rights of persons with disabilities is an essential tool to protect and promote those rights. A key theme in the strategy is to ensure a decent and adequate quality of life for all persons with disabilities. This can only be achieved by developing community and family-based services and supports to ensure a life outside of institutions. The Commission supports national, regional, and local authorities in the development of community-based services and the deinstitutionalization of care systems for persons with disabilities. We do this by funding the investments needed to transition from institutions to community-based support services and care. The European Structural and Investments Funds regulation requires that the member states have put in place national or regional strategic policy frameworks and measures to prevent and combat segregation in all fields, to ensure social inclusion and poverty reduction, and promote the shift from institutional to community-based care. The rules are clear. Funds should not support actions that contribute to any form of segregation or exclusion. And when financing infrastructure, accessibility for persons with disabilities must be ensured. In the incoming months, we will publish guidance recommending to member states improvements on independent living and inclusion in the community, a flagship in the strategy. The right to independent living and inclusion in the community entails developing a full range of services of quality that are accessible, affordable, based on the community and the family. It also requires removing barriers to access mainstream services and providing reasonable accommodation to support the full inclusion of persons with disabilities, including in family, work, and private life. Building blocks for independent living include adopting measures to prevent further institutionalization, including by safeguarding the legal capacity of persons with disabilities, moving away from institutions and from an institutional culture in service provision, ensuring person-centered approaches that place the individual at the center of the service and ensure the provision of support tailored to the person. Breaking down barriers for inclusion in the community, not only through increased accessibility of services, built environment, information and communication or transport, but also through awareness-raising campaigns that combat stereotypes and discrimination. Improving quality of service provision, including through the appropriate training and reskilling of the workforce, and ensuring meaningful participation and involvement of persons with disabilities, as well as their representative organizations in decision-making processes and community life. Taking a practical approach, the guidance will look at how EU funds can be used to accelerate progress in these areas. It will draw conclusions from promising initiatives from member states in developing the conditions for independent living and carrying out deinstitutionalization. The guidance will take account of the diversity of disability and the perspective of multiple identities, such as children with disabilities, persons with psychosocial disabilities, and women with disabilities. In addition, we are in the process of building on the existing voluntary European Quality Framework for Social Services, a specific framework for social services of excellence for persons with disabilities. It will be presented by the end of this year. Independent living is a cross-cutting theme interlinked with other areas of the strategy. Employment, lifelong learning, adequate housing and social protection and accessibility are indispensable for decent living for all persons with disabilities. That means that other strategy flagships contribute to support full inclusion and participation of persons with disabilities. For instance, we delivered guidelines and good practices addressed to employers organizations, and public employment services through the Disability Employment Package. Accessibility is another area of crucial importance for the full participation of persons with disabilities in society and in the economy. Over the last decade, the EU adopted rules to make certain services and goods more accessible. During my mandate, focus in this area has been on implementation. We are monitoring the transposition of the European Accessibility Act, and we launched the flagship Accessible EU Resource Centre. And ahead of this year's European elections, the Commission developed a guide of good electoral practice addressing participation of citizens with disabilities in the electoral process. The active participation of persons with disabilities and their representative organization is essential in the design, implementation, and monitoring of policies and services. Our collaboration with your organizations is instrumental to deliver flagship actions in this strategy. Your feedback and input are key in shaping our initiatives to ensure that they respond to your needs and that they are practical in implementation. We also count on member states and civil society, of course, to support the Commission in the implementation of the Disability Rights Strategy, which will now enter its second phase. As the Commission's mandate draws to a close, we can look at the progress achieved. Disability rights are more consistently mainstreamed and visible, and we have delivered on an ambitious strategy. The stage is now set for the next Commission mandate to advance further towards a union of equality. I thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you for your work during this mandate period, which I know is coming to an end. And we're not happy to hear that they may not even have an equality commissioner next time around, when we know that that's needed, but that you can't say so much about, I think. But thank you very much. And we will open the floor now to questions from from the audience. And I see one way in the back, Florian, I recognize you. Mm. Who is this?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for taking me the floor. I work at the ENIL Secretariat. Yeah, Commissioner Dalli, that the EU funds are helpful in promoting person-centered services and deinstitutionalization. I don't quite understand where this idea is coming from, how you can even say this. We have only 2 personal assistance projects in the EU, and they're not even done well. Often the amount of hours people are granted is too low. Many people still go without who need it, but we have documented at ENIL plenty of cases of investments in institutions. The Recovery and Resilience Facility basically is without rules, without any safeguards. We had large projects permitted in Spain or Bulgaria where large institutions were built. So I don't quite understand this. This spin. Sorry. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your remarks. And during these 5 years, I have stuck to your motto: nothing about you without you. So we have been engaged in communication with persons with disabilities organizations, and together we have formulated our policies with regards to the needs, of course, of persons with disabilities. And deinstitutionalization has always been an issue, and we are very much aware, and we work with member states, even on the cases which you have mentioned. We work with member states towards this deinstitutionalization, and we look at where the funds are going, and we have been holding funds with regards to the building of institutions, but of course those which were there or were nearly ready or in an advanced process, obviously, as you are saying, they continued to be finished. But the idea and our efforts are towards deinstitutionalization. Nothing, of course, happens overnight. So my suggestion to you is to continue flagging these deficits, because to me they are strong deficits. If we want persons with disabilities within the community, we not only not need to encourage the building of institutions and not help the building of institutions, but also see that there is care in the community, because you rightly mention personal assistance, and therefore in the care strategy we also speak a lot about the care sector and how much this needs to be improved, because it is pointless speaking about independent living and deinstitutionalization without providing the necessary persons to do the care work, and also to look at the conditions of employment of care workers, because a lot of people do not want to go and work in that sector. So it's a complex problem with a lot of implications. We cannot just say deinstitutionalization. We cannot just say personal carers without dealing with the member states to see their education system, their education guidance. How are they guiding young people to work in the care sector, for instance? And how are we looking at the investment in employment and education of the member states? And also when it comes, of course, to infrastructure, how are we looking at accessibility, and so really it's not something which depends solely on the European Commission, but we all the stakeholders must be on board and understand that the road we are taking is towards deinstitutionalization, and that implies a lot of other things, especially the area of care work, where we really need to do a lot of work there to stop it from being the Cinderella of employment, where very few people want to work. In fact, we have to get people from third countries to do our care work for us because we don't want to do it. Also, you have to factor in the fact that Europe is aging, so we need more workers, even for the elderly, not just for persons with disabilities. So there are less people to work, and that is why then we need to, let me use the crude word, import this labor. But then together with that comes the dignity and the conditions of employment of these workers, which leave much to be desired. In my tenure as commissioner, I've witnessed quite a few problems in this area when it comes to employment. So I understand your plight for personal carers, which is of the essence if we are really to work towards deinstitutionalization. So you make an excellent comment here, which is really the essence of what we have to aim at and work for if we are to implement what we are saying. But as ever, I continue to insist, nothing about you without you. So please keep being vocal, keep reaching out to commissioners, to people who have the power to change things. Thank you.
I see many hands. Lucas, did you have your hand up first? And then somebody behind, and then you. Sorry, you have time for one question. Before I open the questions, thank you for what you're saying. We see some of the problems you're talking about in Sweden when it comes to finding carers, but we don't call them carers. I hate the word care. We need support, not care. I get care when I'm sick, and I'm not vulnerable. I'm marginalized. Yes. Those are two words the European Union use that make me crawl.
It's a care strategy, so I agree with you. I agree with you.
But it makes me crawl, sorry. But okay, one important question for the commissioner. I'll give it to Luca.
Jamie, here was one first.
One first there, sorry,
yeah.
Okay.
Can you turn on the mic? Yeah, I think.
Is it on? Yeah, okay. I would just like to point out that we don't have audio descriptions of the room or of the people speaking, and I would like to suggest that if anyone wants an audio description of the room or like me to describe what things look like for them, I will be waiting by the window to the left if they need anything.
Thank you. That was good pointing out. No questions. So we do have one more time, one more question. And who's the most important? I have no idea. Raise your hands. First hand there. Bed here.
Good morning, everyone. I would like, Commissioner Dalli, I would like to know if you are aware that the current investment and structural fund in Greece is used for building new segregational settings, like group homes. They are called shelters of supported living, and many kind of segregational settings which promotes segregation and institutionalization. And this is not something that had been already in the process. It is something new. All these little institutions are being, they have decided to build them during the last 2 years. And the persons living there in these segregational group homes are considered to be deinstitutionalized, which is not true. And they don't even have the right to apply for personal assistance. Are you aware of it?
Thank you for your comment. And this is why, as I said earlier, it is so important to have these exchanges with you. And it is via these exchanges or via also other communications which we receive from member states, which draw our attention to these situations as you are mentioning. Of course, we cannot know what all the 27 member states are doing at the same time. I mean, it's of course important that you flag these situations, and that is when we investigate these things, when we know about them. Of course, we have our people who are flagging also these realities, and it's sometimes people can be very creative on working around what we are aiming at in the sense of this deinstitutionalization. In fact, you said group living, so that sounds a better word than an institution. So that is one creative way of cutting corners and not following what we really want to arrive at. So definitely this will be something which will be looked at to see whether it is in line with deinstitutionalization and therefore in line with what the EU is prepared to give funding for. But if it is taking us backwards towards institutionalization, of course, action will be taken. So if you can give me the details of this project, we can investigate that. And thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Thank you for the question and thank you for the answer. And in line with the CRPD and Article 19 and General Comment 5, that would be great. I see that time has gotten away. We're already in the next session. So I can't open for any more questions. I'm sorry, I get involved. It's, oh gosh, the time's gone. But thank you to this panel for your input and important things that you're telling us. And we're looking forward to a better future with the support of all of you and all of us. And we have so much to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the hope. It was good. It was very good. Short but sweet, but great.
It was nice meeting you. What are you going to do
Very
after
good.
your...
No, you know, I big. Okay. And for
there's other ways to be engaged.
yeah, I was just going to say the next panelists, as these panelists leave the podium, are Antonia Trikalioti, I think, who just spoke, and then we have Simone Aspis, and we have Stephen Allen and Nick Crosby, please. Yeah, if you'd like to, that would be great. We stayed together.
Don't mind.
Thank you. Stay. I'm happy with that.
You mentioned it yesterday. You said, why aren't you
I get
moderating
tired.
it?
So I need to
Yeah,
go.
no, it's fine.
I am getting tired. I'm too old for all this. Go home
Actually,
at
this
12,
is-
have to take a shower,
I
have to
know.
get up at 6 and
I
back
know,
and
it's really
day
difficult.
after day, and they always put me in the fan, and it's like, no, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey,
Hi, good to see you again today.
nice to see you. How are you?
We're hanging in there.
We are.
I think we see more beach today than the last 2 days we've done the last 10 years. I think we see more beach area.
Yeah. Guess she's leaving, as usual.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you, tell me your guys' names.
Stephen.
I'm Simone.
I'm Stephen.
Yeah, sure.
Nick.
My name's Simone.
Antonia.
I'll leave it to you then. There they are. The golden cages.
Okay.
I asked for Nikolai to be
Yeah,
able to
that's
have
fine.
the first question when we get there.
Ah, it's okay. I will tell you if I need.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I'm
Alright.
just going to say I might. so I can keep an eye on what I'm doing. Sometimes I just play it by ear.
Okay, without any further ado, I've offered to co-moderate this session with Jamie, just so that she can take a minute. And so we are talking in this session about deinstitutionalization and fighting against golden cages. Our first speaker is Antonia from iLiving in Greece.
Good morning, everyone. Jamie, thank you for inviting me. My first freedom drive was 11 years ago, and I think about all the things that have been promoted in Greece because of that freedom drive, and I'm very emotional about it. In Greece, we have a new, the first DI strategy. It was assigned to the EASPD. They had to make 3 different strategies, one for adult disabled persons, one for the children, disabled or non-disabled, which is actually good because children were treated equally, and one for the elderly. These strategies was not only about the institutionalization, but their goal was to stop further institutionalization, to prevent it. Then they formed 3 separate groups for consultations, and I was a part of the groups for adults, disabled persons, and for children. I must admit that the intentions of the DI strategy of the children, of every stakeholder, were much better because it was clear to everyone that children should live in families to be deinstitutionalized, and that early intervention is really important. On the other hand, the group for adult disabled persons consisted of more than 60 members, while just 3 of us were representatives of, were disabled representatives of organizations, and more than 40 was representatives of institutions who were actually looking extremely happy, as if they had won the lottery, because I suppose that they were informed about the use of new EU funds to keep their businesses running, rather than they had to stop operating and put an end to the imprisoning of the disabled persons. The 3 of us kept on requesting for more disabled persons to participate, but nothing really changed. Just one time in one meeting, 2 institutionalized women were participating. They had about the same age, the same impairment. They were living in the same institution, so their experience was more or less the same. They could not talk openly because they had no alternative. They could not share every bad aspect of living in the institution. Furthermore, the consultation was during the pandemic, so they were talking from the institution at our Zoom meeting, which made it even more hard for them to speak. I know it because I communicate with one of them. I believe that this strategy was already decided before the consultations begin, because, and that was just a part of an agreement, of a plan, because even though the consultations lasted for several months, nothing changed to the original DI plan. And despite our contribution, it was decided to establish many new types of segregational settings to prevent institutionalization and to include us in the community. As for the already institutionalized ones, as I said before to the commissioner, the plan is to found shelters of supported living, which are actually smaller institutions because the living conditions there are imposed by others. Of course, as I said, they don't have the right to apply for PA because they are considered to be deinstitutionalized. So this is not even introduced as an intermediate step of the process of DI, which would also be against the new UN guidelines on DI. Unfortunately, this was not the only time that I contributed to the drafting of a strategy which had been already decided. A Greek administrative region assigned to me to be the scientific supervision of a working group of 60 members and to work voluntarily for many months to make a strategy to promote disabled people's rights and protect them with the use of the investment and structural funds for the next 7 years. The final text of our strategy had received many good critics. They said that this was great, and right after it I found out that the ministry had already delivered a strategy for the same funds, which included the building of these group homes, and none of our propositions have been implemented so far. So this is how things work in Greece. And I just want you to give you an example of how is the process of the DI in Greece. A big institution at Helena, the one that children and young adults were found tied down behind bars, chemically sedated in extremely awful conditions. It was the first one to participate to the DI process. It's been more than 6 years now that the Greek authorities started this process, and it is not yet completed. They just moved some of them to flats at the nearby city, and the same staff support these people, the staff that used to torture them for 20 years, and all this happens with EU funds. As you can see, it's clear that our contribution, participation or co-production is just a mandatory term, at least in Greece. At the end of the day, it is not taken into account, and it is just a waste of time in most cases, but I suggest that we should keep on wasting that time without refusing to participate, because our contribution at some point it may make a big or a small difference. For example, I-Living's, my organization contribution in the legislation of personal assistance was huge. We shaped that law, at least its fundamental core was dictated by us. So you might be wondering, why does the same thing haven't happened to the DI strategy? I believe that it is just a matter of luck, because every government just wants the things to get done. They don't care if they will be done wrong or right. And so they just happened to assign the DI strategy to the EASPD, and they just stick with that. When it came to the PA legislation, there was no assignment, and during the first meeting of the working group for this legislation, I-Living made sure that it is clear to everyone that we were the only experts in the room. So we unofficially have led that procedure. And so my advice to others is to be experts, to be aware of all of the conventions and the good international practices, and also to be loud about it, because as you can see, I'm a woman, I'm severely impaired, and especially men in these working groups and consultations has unsuccessfully tried to show up their superiority, to mansplain me, but because of my expertise, I made clear to everyone who is the expert and who is talking nonsense. But another piece. Another piece of advice is to try just avoid humiliating persons in important positions. This is something I failed. I think the DI strategy, as I have already said, is funded by the EU, but on the web, on the official sites of the ministries and all of the authorities, and also on the media, there is no info about how this process of the DI is right now in Greece. The most recent info is the final text of the strategy, which was uploaded 2 years ago. We can find out on what stage of the DI we are. There is no info about the number of the persons that have been deinstitutionalized. I believe that it is 0, and no info about the number of the persons that have been institutionalized since the beginning of the strategy. I Living requested that info from the ministry, but we received no answer. And I think that the EU should at least request for the transparency of these procedures, because when DPOs can have these numbers, they can report it. And there is no way that any government would give false info to all the monitoring systems of the EU or the UN. That's all I want to say so far. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antonia. That was really, really humbling to hear, I think. And this idea of needing transparency to increase awareness of the number of people institutionalized. I think Nick mentioned it on a previous day as well, this requirement to have knowledge of those figures so that we can all be more informed in our campaigns and in our messages to decision makers. So thank you. Next we have Simone Aspis from Free Our People Now campaign based in the UK. So Simone, the floor is yours.
Do I just speak? Yeah. Can everybody hear me? Oh, no, no, the microphone. Lovely. Okay, can everyone hear me? No.
Yes, yeah.
Hello? Oh, you can now. Okay. Right. Okay, good morning, everyone. Just want to say my name is Simone Aspis. Quick description of myself. I'm quite a podgy woman. I have a Free Our People campaign t-shirt on me. I have a few grey hairs, which is what comes when you're doing 30 years of campaigning on disabled people rights. You'll get there in the end. But still going. And I've got a black pair of trousers. What I'm going to do is I will read out the slides, but I am going to ask whether the person who's audio descripting for blind people and for people who are visually impaired can facilitate. That would be great, because I'm unable to do both things together. I'm a disabled person. I identify myself as being neurodivergent. I'm a neurodivergent stroke learning difficulties, intellectual disabilities, whatever you want to call it, but in the UK, it's neurodivergent stroke learning difficulties. So, Free Our People campaign, we are supported by Inclusion London, which is a disabled people's-led organisation. If you want to have a look, find out more about us, www.inclusionlondon.org.uk. But we are a London-based organisation campaigning for disabled people's rights. So, background to Free Our People Now. So Free Our People Now is a campaign that's led and controlled by people with learning difficulties and autistic people. All my slides have images. If they're good enough for people with learning difficulties in the UK, then they're good enough for the whole of the disabled people's community and to everybody else. So, campaign is led by people with learning difficulties and autistic people. The aim is to stop people going into a psychiatric hospital, stop them going in the first place. Second thing is to get people out and make sure they stay out once and for all. So the background to the campaign is this. It started off with one person ringing me up, somebody went to school with, who said, I need an advocate. And I thought, ooh. Not only was I being asked to support somebody in a psychiatric system, not just anyone, it was the biggest one in Europe. It was St Andrew's Hospital, found wanting for abuse in their institutions. So I said, not sure I'm the person to do this. My background is general disability rights work, but I specialise in education. I've got 14 years campaigning for disabled people's rights to inclusive education. So she said, well, you know everything about disabled people rights. Says you do campaign. Yeah, okay. So that's where it began. Free Our People campaign began from working with, first of all, one person to get them out of the psychiatric system. Took them 5 years to do it. I haven't got time to talk about it, other than to say it was a 5-year struggle to get somebody out of the psychiatric system, living happily in their own home, which is what they're doing at the moment. And through that opportunity, because it was an opportunity, I found there were a number of people that were asking me to also do advocacy work. So I worked with a number of people with their care plans to get them out of the psychiatric system. During that time, I noticed there was a lot of parents taking forward the campaign to get people out of hospitals. It was all about their loved ones. It was all about their own children. It was not about people with learning difficulties, autistic people who may or may not have loving parents, who may or may not have any support. That's where the network began. That's where Free Our People began. We wanted a voice, nothing about us without us. So I'm going to be talking about how about the work we've been doing the last year. So, first thing we've done is we set up a national network called Bring People Home from Psychiatric Hospital. It's a network of groups and organisations and campaigns led by people with learning difficulties, autistic people, and it's who are doing really good work in supporting people to get out of hospitals. So we have Scotland people first, who are doing a lot of work, who are working with people with learning difficulties and autistic people in hospitals and are trying to move them out. They've done a lot of work in engaging with the Scottish Parliament around mental capacity and mental health legislation. We've got My Life, My Choice, for example, who have developed a discharge resource aimed at people with learning difficulties and autistic people that are leaving out of hospital. So you might be wondering, what's Inclusion London doing, and what is Free Our People campaign doing? So first thing was, it was beginning of the year. One thing that was sure, there was going to be a general election in the UK. So the network decided what it wanted to do was do a manifesto. The first manifesto that was going to be written by people with learning difficulties and autistic people who got lived experience of being in hospital. So we ensured part of the manifesto that we were going to have in getting each of the parties to sign up actually included the voice of people with learning difficulties and autistic people who've actually been in one of these psychiatric hospitals and can speak from their experiences about the things that they wanted to have done. At that time, we also produced some resources in easy read to help people learn difficulty in autistic people who are in the psychiatric hospital to know their rights and to get out there and vote for the party that they believed were going to move them out of hospital and back into the community and make sure that we stay there. So we had 3 demands. So demand number 1. So the network had 3 demands. So the first one was, we've now called it the government ask because it's no longer a manifesto. So we've got Labour Party, Labour government. So the ask number 1 was we wanted a powerful say how to keep us out of psychiatric hospital. Well, that seemed pretty obvious, doesn't it? Co-production at every level. Because at the moment, people learn to call autistic people do not get involved in decisions and in planning for services to get people out of hospital. And that's something that we're very clear. So we wanted a powerful voice at government level, where we make the legislation and policy, at regional level, local level, for what we call the integrated care boards, local authorities, to plan and to work with developing a deinstitutionalisation plan, or what we call it, for hospitals from homes campaign, to ensure that we were absolutely involved from the beginning. Number 2. So number 2 is government ask number 2, our right to live decent lives in our community. So we talked about there very clearly about compliance with UN CRPD, because unless you've got compliance with UN CRPD, then you're not going to have decent lives. It's literally going to be personal assistance, if you're lucky, at home, and that's about it. So we wanted to make sure that a clear message that we send to the EU is this is not just decent lives isn't simply just about people having personal assistance. It has to be about people having good lives. What are the opportunities that everything that is available to us, available to the general public, must be accessible and inclusive of everybody, including people with learning difficulties and autistic people. So this is about the incorporation of not just UN CRPD Article 12, 7 and 19, because it's all well and good having the right to liberty and making your own decisions, but you can't access anything because nothing is inclusive and accessible, then what choice do you have anyway? So that's about very clearly saying that what we need is that we need the government to make sure that we have decent lives and that they are compliant with UN CRPD, and the mental health legislation they're putting forward also does the same. Right, third one. We had a big discussion about this because obviously like everybody else, we have limited resources. So the third government ask is treat us with respect and protected from abuse everywhere. There's always a danger that we could spend all our money and resources in trying to make the psychiatric system safer, more safer and protection away abuse. But that isn't what we mean. So our community were very wanted to make sure that one of the big things we needed to have was make sure that people learning difficulties and autistic people are not abused anywhere, whether that is personal assistance provided within their own homes, whether that is out and about in the community, so people on the transport system. So we took a very holistic approach about this, but this is about ensuring that people with learning difficulties and autistic people were able to move around freely and not be abused not have disability, hate crime, etc. So those are the three main demands that we came up with. We are anticipating to be using this to lobby our government. So, our government want to bring in another mental health law. We've had over 20 years of our governments promising to bring in mental health law. And we anticipate this one is going to be the same. Big problem with our mental health law, it's like everywhere else, I'm sure you've heard it many times before, it starts in the wrong place. It starts from some people's minds think different, some people's minds and the way they are, their way of being in the world, their thinking and acting in the world isn't acceptable. So therefore we need to lock them up because it's social control. So the first thing we need to do is challenge society about what is considered as being quote, quote, norm. We need to challenge our cultural norms. We need a challenge, particularly in a society where we're becoming, I feel, less tolerant towards people who are different. Hence why there is a devaluing of disabled people, including those who have got learning difficulties and autistic people. Starts from the wrong place. It starts from, as you might expect, locking people up in hospital. And how do we give people learning difficulties? How do we give people with mental health conditions? So what I should say is the mental health law covers mental health disorders, quote, quote, I put in quote because they're not language I would use, learning disabilities and autism. So it covers 3 areas in the UK, but it's very similar probably around the world. Starts from locking people up. And how do we give people the illusion that they'd be able to have more rights? By tinkering with the court system, by court treatment, definition, but at the end of the day, it starts from the wrong place. It starts from a place where we need to lock people up as opposed to the right to live independently in the community. So, alongside our legal work, alongside going to be doing work on the mental health bill that's coming up at the end of the year, our network are doing other things as well. We've still got people locked up in hospital. And they're coming to us and saying, oi, we need a lawyer to help people get out of hospital. We don't provide legal assistance, but what we are finding more and more is lawyers don't want to work with us. They want to work with parents, because parents and carers are nice and neat. They can produce what documents. You know, you're trying to work with somebody with learning difficulty, an autistic person who might be having a meltdown, maybe in a very disorganized state, haven't got the documents, haven't got the passport, your ID, So we are working with Access to Social Care to produce a chatbot, which is basically a online facility to try and advise people on their rights to social care and how they can get out of hospital. And we're also providing 1-hour advisory services. Not suggesting this is perfect with Access Social Care. What we want to say is we are trying our best at the network to provide legal support for people who need this support in hospital and to get out of hospital and stay out of hospital. But what we need is really proper funding for us to be able to do the work properly. And we are hoping to produce some resources with people who are locked up in hospital. So the resources are co-produced with people, learning and autistic people in hospital. Because a lot of the Easy Read stuff at the moment is produced by Easy Read providers, but not working in co-production with people in hospital. And we're aiming to do that. We are working with Access to Social Care. The other piece of work we're doing is the Equality Human Rights Commission. So that's your UK Human Rights Watchdog. and they had been doing a lot of work in looking at the state of people, learning difficulty in autistic people in hospitals. They're saying it's not good enough. What the previous government have said in terms of getting people out of hospital, we are saying exactly the same thing, and we're looking to try and work with the Equality and Human Rights Act Commission to do this work and to push lawyers to start working with us, so at least we can work with people on a one-to-one basis to get out of hospital, whilst we're trying to do the big campaign work, which is try and get the whole legislation changed so that people don't go into hospitals in the first place. And then the UN CRPD Monitoring Committee report. Right, I mentioned this yesterday. UK have been found violating disabled people's human rights. The Monitoring Committee said this back in 2006. 16, thank you, 2016. And we are in the process of having our records reviewed again. It's not going to be any different whatsoever. One of the things they did say was we were found violating disabled people's human rights because we were locking people up in hospitals against their wishes, and we were medicating people against their wishes. So we are given the Labour government have signed and ratified the UN CRPD, we absolutely need to be using them to say, right, you signed it, you ratified it, and you actually brought it in. What are we going to be doing to make sure that is fully implemented? And then what we're also doing alongside that is building the capacity of people, learning difficulty in autistic people, to take forward the campaign, because we recognise one of the things we're really, really keen to do is this piece of area work. We really want to try and get into the institutions to try and get people to have a voice, because what we recognise is whilst our network has been set up and we've got people with lived experience of hospitalisation, what we are really wanting to do much more is to make sure that actually what we are hearing is the voice that never gets heard. People who are detained under the Mental Health Act, people who are locked up in these dreadful institutions, because it's only when we get their voice that we are really going to be able to make things happen in terms of nothing about us without us. And we have a number of resources we are going to be producing around the UN Convention. And then finally, if you want to contact us, our details are up there. So you can contact myself. I'm Free Our People Campaigns Manager at Inclusion London, Simone.Aspis at inclusionlondon.co.uk. And our telephone number is, I can always give you a telephone number, but I assume most of you are going to email us, email me, and then our Twitter account is Inclusion London. So all it leaves me to say is one thing. None of us are free until we're all free, until everybody is out of every single institution. So that leaves me to say one thing only to all of us is, free our people now. So say it after.
Free people now.
Say it now. Louder.
Free our people now.
And the last one is institutions, no solutions.
Institutions, no solutions.
Thank you very much. I'm around for the rest of the day. And if anybody wants to talk to me, feel free to do so. The other thing I need to say, I always say this, if you really want to sign up to my Twitter feed as well, at SFA Active as well. Okay?
Thank you, Simone, especially for that that rousing end and the very poignant point to say that the people in institutions aren't the ones that are in this room, and we actually have a hell of a lot of privilege when we think about how relatively easy it is for us to have these connections and the conversations that we're having today. And so thinking about how we can bring this energy and this drive that we all feel in this room to those in institutions as well, that would be very, very positive. Our next speaker is Stephen Allen from the Validity Foundation in Hungary.
Thank you very much, Charlie. And whilst you can probably hear, actually, I think I'm the third Brit on this table speaking. So whilst I live in and work in Budapest in Hungary, I'm originally British. I think there's also something to say about our privilege as Brits on this table. So I've actually been here over the last couple of days more happy than ever to listen than speak too much. Because the Validity, and I'll say a little bit about our work, we're very, very proud to be associate members of the European Network on Independent Living. I also want to say that we are a specialized legal advocacy organization, and we exist to serve you and this specific movement of activists and independent living advocates. We're not an organization of persons with disabilities, but what we have is some legal expertise that we can put in your service. And I invite you all to reach out to me and my organization after this to talk about how we can turn the CRPD not just from an advocacy document but into legally valid claims. So we need to get these claims in the courts, and I think I heard Theresia say it earlier as well, that the CRPD contains some crucially important promises that can help us achieve independent living, but persons with disabilities, and particularly those institutionalized, are not yet getting in front of our courts, and we need to get them there, because this will promote some real change. A little bit about Validity. We act always on behalf of and under the instructions of persons with disabilities. Now, why is this important, even in legal work? Well, often people with disabilities experience numerous physical, but also legal barriers to accessing justice. And in fact, as lawyers, frequently, we are prevented from representing people with disabilities, at least, by formal legal rules that deprive people with disabilities, often those in institutions, of their legal capacity. Nevertheless, I think it's possible, and certainly Validity's networks of lawyers in Europe and Africa have found it crucial to continue taking proceedings even where the courts say people lack legal capacity. We often have to have a battle at the doors of the courts just to get claims into them. And I think that's a crucial battle because access to justice is often denied to people who are locked in institutions and have no other access out into the community. And we have to have that first battle in every single case that we take. Loud, proud, and visible is one of the things that ENIL teaches us is crucial about promoting change, but often the courts are not open in the first case to these people, and we need to keep fighting at these doors. So let me get back to my speech before I go off topic. We take, broadly speaking, 3 areas of litigation to try and create some change. We challenge these abusive guardianship regimes, which in fact give rise to impunity for human rights violations. We try to take cases on behalf of those who are currently institutionalized so that they can get out, and also that they can have redress and reparations for the harms that they have faced. And we also work in the field of inclusive education. But Validity is not a legal aid organization. In fact, in every case we take, we work alongside survivors and victims of disability rights abuses, and we build strategies together to use individual cases together to promote systemic reforms. We want to enhance the position of organizations of people with disabilities through this litigation, so that they are around tables and important decision-making tables, including here in Brussels. And we call this approach to our litigation a reparative justice approach. We're not just targeting the old abuses that happen in institutions that we know very well, but we're seeking positive actions from duty bearers, including from here in the European Union, to take steps that will prevent future harms, but also get us in greater alignment with the CRPD. Now, legal action, I wanted to say, can be a very long and arduous road, but it does have the potential to provide justice to victims of human rights violations. It can provide impetus for law reform, what we've been talking about. How do you get independent living on the statute books, including even at the level of constitutions of countries? It can be a platform whereby the claims of people with disabilities are transformed, not just as social justice demands, but as legally enforceable claims. And it can provide a powerful form, in our view, of validation of the lives and experiences of those who have been historically silenced, hidden, and denied their rightful place in the community. And so in every one of our cases, we work with incredible human rights defenders in their own rights, individuals who have often experienced horrific atrocities. And I have to say, often we lose cases at first instance, and we work alongside individuals who are in extremely difficult situations who understand this. Often they work with us because they are so keen to promote real change and prevent others experiencing what they have experienced. And I think we need to recognize this in everything we do. What else can we achieve through our strategic litigation? We can achieve legal recognition of CRPD standards, and I'm going to mention particularly how we've done this around Article 19, General Comment number 5, and the recent DI guidelines from the UN. We can achieve cessation of violations in some cases, and we can put an end to practices, shockingly, that continue to exist even across Europe. And we can provide some impetus for systemic reforms. So I'm going to give you 3 broad examples that show how we've done this. So I've mentioned that Validity is headquartered in Hungary, which, as you know, is a relatively small country, 10 million people, but has one of the highest rates of both institutionalization and guardianship of people with disabilities in the region. And you might also know that the reasons for this are connected with the country's history under socialist regimes, which kept people locked away, and often in rural settings, far from our cities and towns. And although Hungary joined the EU in 2004, the country's social care system remains premised on a system of institutionalization and guardianship, with very, very little real commitment to providing the new types of services in the community that are so necessary to support independent living. In 2017, we gained access to a large-scale institution that warehouses 220 adults and children with disabilities on the outskirts of the capital, Budapest. And inside, we found the scene of an atrocity at the heart of modern Europe: unsanitary conditions, malnutrition, severe abuse and exploitation, sexual violence, physical, chemical, and mechanical restraint of children and adults. And with death rates much higher than the general population and high gates preventing anyone from ever leaving or indeed entering this institution, we knew we had to raise the alarm. Following extensive investigations where we found that the majority of these people were indeed under the guardianship of the state, we exposed these abuses to the international community and began various types of legal action to try and get some change. Now, national procedures in Hungary were long, slow, and dismissive. The police refused to investigate clear crimes of torture and violence and abuse. But we also, at the time, initiated a request for an inquiry under the optional protocol to the CRPD. And Simone has mentioned the UK inquiry. Hungary has also got an inquiry. And so TOP has became, I think, symbolic of serious failures, not just in Hungary, but interestingly for you, in terms of European Union policy. And why is this? Well, because EU funds were all over the institution. Now, when we tried to complain to the European Commission about this and even prompt their legal action against Hungary, the most frequent problem that we experienced was that the European Commission, including commissioners such as Helena Dalli, who was here earlier, would say that this is a national competence, okay? We might be providing the funding, but we can't control, in every case, where governments spend it on places like Topaz. This is false. Under international law, there are clear legal obligations, including under European law, to prevent the misuse of European public financing. And ever since we raised the case here, we knew we wouldn't get much justice in Hungary itself, and cases are still ongoing many, many years later for the victims in that institution. We have been pushing the European Commission to take action. They defend every claim, but what we have found eventually through repeated follow-up with the European Commission is that they are hearing the arguments and they are beginning to put pressure on Hungary as a result. And why? And why? Because here in Brussels, they were deeply embarrassed to see that the EU logo was actually on the front door of this institution. And for them, it's a PR problem, is what they say. Now, look, a PR problem is a bit of a joke to call this a PR problem. In fact, it's a legal problem. Hungary has violated its legal obligations under the CRPD. It has violated its obligations under European Union law, which is supposed to prevent the misuse of this financing. And indeed, the European Commission, as we have told them, are also violating European law by failing to step in when they know there's these problems. We simply don't accept any longer that the European institutions are unaware of these problems. Often they say, tell us if there's a problem and we'll act. But actually we're not seeing that in practice. And that's because there are very few legal avenues to challenge decisions. So eventually we have got some awareness around this topic. We have got some additional control of Hungary in terms of how it's using the financing. But Hungary is continuing to try and hide its use of EU funding, nevertheless, by using it in other ways to promote smaller forms of institutions in the country, which you've heard about earlier today. So a second situation that I want to move on to is to talk about how do we build the impetus for more systemic reforms. The segregation and abuses faced by people with intellectual and psychosocial disabilities, as you also know, continue to flow from outdated and unreformed laws and policies and practices. For us, one of the important roles that litigation can play is giving the impetus for some wider reforms to take place. At the age of 30, I'm going to talk about one case now, which is took place in Moldova, where we got a more promising judgment. At the age of 13, our client, Victor, a child with an intellectual disability and so-called behavioral problems, was forcibly admitted to Moldova's National Psychiatric Hospital after being abandoned. This will be a familiar story to many of you, I'm sure. There he was forcibly medicated, physically and chemically restrained, and had his hands tied while he was kept on a locked adult psychiatric ward. No other services were available in the country to care for this so-called troubled young man, and so he was subjected to many weeks of traumatic abuses. Following a long legal battle, the European Court of Human Rights has just this year found that these violations amounted to ill treatment in violation of Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights. But more importantly, and this is where the CRPD steps in, they have found that this treatment amounts to multiple and intersecting discrimination on the basis of disability and age. And the reason this judgment is quite important, it's IV versus Moldova, is that the court ordered not only compensation to Victor, and very substantial compensation at that, but have also indicated something called general measures to the country. Now, general measures is when the court says this is not an individual isolated problem, but we know that children and young people with disabilities, adults also with disabilities, persons with psychosocial disabilities frequently experience the same types of violations, and they have placed an obligation on the government there to undertake systemic reforms to law, policy and practice to prevent this in the future. Now, this is a positive judgment from a pretty conservative judicial forum, recognizing, in fact, that institutionalization itself is a violation of European Convention law, and it gives us a process for ongoing monitoring and enforcement of the judgment. And this is why I raise this particular case, is that once we have judgments from the European Court or other courts across the European system, we can then open up a longer-term process of monitoring and pushing for compliance. It turns our debate not just into advocacy meetings with governments, but about enforcement of legal judgments. And I think that does help promote a wider systemic change. Now, let me come finally to the European Union, and I'm probably over time, aren't I? Probably over time. But I think that one of the problems we have here in the European Union is that although the European institutions have ratified the CRPD, they have not created any clear legal enforcement mechanisms to ensure compliance with, by member states or the institutions itself with CRPD standards. And we have been trying to open new routes to access to justice to deal with some of the problems that some of you were talking about, which include a lack of information on where the money is going, who is gaining access, and related, and also to prevent the misuse of funding. Now, we've taken a few cases before the Court of Justice of the EU, and I'm sorry to tell you that the Court of Justice of the EU often says, and it has very restrictive rules on this, that beneficiaries of so-called projects under EU money don't have any legal standing. I think that that is a serious, serious democratic problem in the management of the EU funds in terms of the EU's compliance with the convention itself. And indeed, we need to be calling very, very hard, I think, for strongly for the need to open access to justice for people who are affected by this funding. At the present time, the court says no, you cannot challenge, even if you are placed in a group home, you cannot challenge the European Commission's decision to send money to Hungary, to Bulgaria, to Greece for this. I think this needs to be very, very high on the agenda at the review of the EU next year in March. So let's raise this to the CRPD committee members, because ultimately, if we can get claims in courts and we can get judicially enforceable judgments, I think we can begin to promote some change. We also can then start to close this accountability gap, where commissioners like Commissioner Dalli can't just come here and give us platitudes about politically how she's going to change things, but we can also hold her legally accountable for the decisions she takes. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. That was very insightful in terms of the work, but also the work that is that we need to continue doing. For those of you that are clock watching, I've been told that we can continue the session until 1:15, as lunch is until 12:15, as lunch is until 1:30. So we will have some time for questions after the next speaker, who I am looking forward to introducing, who is Nick Crosby from NDTI. He is another Brit speaker, but don't hold that against him. His work is phenomenal. And over to you, Nick.
I've got a timer, but I'm not sure if I'll stick to it. Could somebody put my slide up, please? So one or two people were at a workshop. I can't sit behind desks. I can't stand still. Sit still very much. Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Elegant little skip there. I'm not very good at sitting still, and I certainly don't like sitting up here, so I'm just going to stand down here and point to a group of photographs. For people who can't see this clearly, there's a group of people up on the screen. I'm going to talk about one or two of their stories. There's some quotes as well, which I'll come to. And there's also a really good job advert, although I'm not sure how many of you are in Glasgow and able to apply to support Tommy, but anyway, we'll come to that. This is all about, or what Ines asked me to talk about was the bit that Simone was talking about, which is we're not all free until everybody's free. And I'm working alongside people with, I guess, it's difficult to share how individual their support needs are. All the people I work alongside have got intellectual disabilities, or they're autistic. They all have mental health support needs because they've been institutionalized. Most of them, if not every single one that I've met, has got major early life trauma that's causing them distress even though they're adults now. And so their behaviors can be quite different. They can hurt themselves. They might hurt other people. I think it's really important, though, to give you a little hint on that, because sometimes it feels like this is a forgotten group of people. They're so complicated that you hear that phrase, and I hear it from politicians and service managers and people all over the country in the UK and in elsewhere, is some people are too complicated to live independently. And I think what these stories are all about is no one's too complicated. You just have to give people the support that works for them. And the problem is we're not very good at doing that because we don't listen. So in the top corner, there's a picture of a falling down institution, kind of castle place. This is a place called Lennox Castle. It's very important to me. It's very important to the folk up on the screen. They closed Lennox Castle in 1990, in the late 1990s. It was an institution, long-stay institution for people with intellectual disabilities and mental health support. As part of the closure process, there was a group of people who'd been, most of whom had been placed there very early in their lives and needed a lot of support when they were going to be moving out. There was no real support for them in the community. So we had to start from scratch, or so the team there had to start from scratch. I call them we because I still work alongside all this team, and they're kind of my gurus or go-to people. Huey, in the middle here, there's an old photograph of an old guy with a beard, big smile, orange sweatshirt. Huey I met Huey a couple of years ago. Huey was one of the first people to be supported in a very different way, in a very person-centered way. And what that means was, people went to him and said, tell us your story, Huey. Tell us what life's been like. Tell us how you like to live. Tell us how you like to be supported. Tell us what doesn't work. Tell us all the things that we shouldn't do. Tell us what happens when you're having a difficult day. How do we support you when you're having a difficult day? And so they set out to support Huey in the way that worked for him. Huey, 22 years later, having moved out with lots of support, sees the support guy once a week for about an hour. And it's usually more of a social check-in. He's got a girlfriend, he's got his own flat, he's living quite independently, and his life's okay. Mark, there's a photograph of a young man, short dark hair, grey t-shirt, sitting in a garden. There's a video on our website of Mark talking about what support means for him. Mark been in an institution for 20 years. Mark moved out last summer. Mark's life, if you can imagine someone who's been in an institution for 20 years, is heavily traumatized by that segregation and that seclusion. Mark will tell you almost exactly the same story as Huey, in that Mark had a chance to say, this is what works, this is my story, this is my life, this is who is important to me, this is what you don't do if you want to support me well, this is how to support me. And his support centers all on what works for Mark. One of the most important things for Mark is magnet fishing. It's important to listen to people and find out what works for them and what they like doing, not to try and fit them into a service where they don't fit. So his support team now are all learning about magnet fishing. That's really, it might sound daft to some people, But just to explain, that means putting a big magnet on the end of a rope and standing on the side of a canal, casting it in and seeing what bits of metal you haul out. And it's fascinating, and he's found some really cool stuff. And his team are now taking it up. What they're doing, though, is the really important thing, and it's in this job advert I'll come to now, is one, you start by listening to people, but then you support people with people who share their interests. You don't say, do you need 2 hours of support on a Friday night? You say, do you like magnet fishing, or do you want to learn? Or in this advert, is like, do you like playing computer games like Tommy? Or another advert is, come and spin discs with DJ Jake, yeah? Because we're building relationships with people whose life experience has been innumerable endings of relationships. And those relationships have never felt very valid, and they've never been about, let's go and talk about Newcastle United. If you want to support me, talk about Newcastle United football team, we're on to a winner. They're about building those relationships and connections, because on those difficult days, people who've been heavily institutionalized will have difficult days. We all have difficult days. These guys can have really, really difficult days that mean they need to go in an ambulance to the hospital, that mean they need to sit down and have a really quiet moment. Relationships that are really strong and built on something that people share means that you can get through those difficult times. The organizations I work with will say, we never walk away from anybody. It doesn't matter how difficult things can get. And that has in one instance meant somebody being taken into prison. When they come out of prison, standing there ready to receive them is their support team. So they never rupture those relationships, because those relationships are what you get you through. I've lost time. It's somewhere over there. Anyway, I wanted to share Chantel's story. Chantel's a young woman who's been supported for 4 years. She was moved out of an institution. She'd had a horrendous early life experience, led to her having lots of difficulties with living in the world. I put Chantel up there. This is one of the last stories that Chantel told on her own. You can't meet Chantel without meeting her beloved boyfriend, who she's getting married to. Good support means that you honor and accept and support people to have an ordinary life. So Chantel and Richard are getting married, and that's great. Richard's also supported by the same organization. It's all about respecting what works for people. It's not complicated. I think that's the thing that you get so often. Some people are so complicated. It's not. You just need to listen to what works for them. You just need to listen to what they say. A couple of things. There's a couple of quotes down at the bottom here. They're in quite small type. We've been supporting a number of different people, and we've been collecting their stories, because it's really important that they have a voice, but their voice is helping us try and change other people's practice. So this is one person who has moved out of an institution. It says, nothing is locked, just the front door, and I've got the key. No one is saying no, it's my space, I'm more independent. Sounds really ordinary, but having the key to your own front door, what power is that, you know? My neighbors are really nice. I introduce myself. People keep themselves to themselves, just how I like it, quiet. You know, that's somebody who goes on in more of the writing to talk about how they struggle with noise, and the institution was always really noisy. And I thought it was really useful just to share a bit of evidence that we've just been gathering. So some of the folk that we've been supporting in the last, number of years, they have in the past needed a lot of interventions, and there's been a lot of incidents in their life. So that's incidents that required police, ambulance, nurse, social worker, all coming out, and quite intensive support at those times. For one person, there was about 156 of these incidents over a year. That's 3 a week. Since they've been supported by one of our small support organizations, they've had 1 incident a week. Sorry, 1 incident a year. That's a massive reduction in distress that's going on for that person. Those incidents come because that person is intensely distressed, and they're showing their distress in ways that are really difficult to help. 1 incident a year from 156 a year. There's another young person who was having major seizures in the institution he was in. Family and people were really worried about his long-term life and whether he would survive. He's been supported for 4 years by Beyond Limits in Plymouth. He's not had a seizure since he moved into that service 4 years ago. He's on no medication, and his life is completely different. And that shows you the intense distress people experience in institutions and how it comes out. But it also shows you the difference when you support people. So that thing about some people are more complicated or too complicated is simply not true. Could I have the next slide? And I'll do it really, really quickly. There's some information up here if people want it. I thought there's 3 things when it comes to really good support. There's something called, and this is, I tend to work at a very people level. I struggle with strategy and all the high-flying stuff because I find myself disconnected from people's lives. So we do something. If it's about the voice of the person, this is positive cake support. There's an awful thing in England and Scotland that Simone and I challenge all the time called positive behaviour support, which is about behaviour modification and making people fit. Anyway, this is a counter to that. This is positive cake support. This is like, if you're going to meet somebody and hear what they're going to say, what's a really good start to it? Take along their favourite cake and have a cup of tea. You know, so this is positive cake support. If we're going to give people a chance to speak, we need to create a place where they feel safe speaking. And a nice bit of cake can help. This is me and Charlie, a young lad I used to work alongside who had a very, very difficult life. And he likes cherry bakewells. It won't mean anything to anybody outside of England, but cherry bakewells are nice little pre-prepared cakes. Human rights, everything we do is based on human rights. Our support plan, when we're writing a plan, is structured around Article 19. So it talks about support, it talks about home, and it talks about community. That follows a discussion with you, Steve, a number of years ago. It's a great way of making someone's human rights live. We're actually planning alongside making the right to independent living live. There's another human right in England around the right to enjoy your personal possessions, the right to a private life. Those things are really challenging if you think about institutions, but we can do that. And the last bit is the importance of connection. That is the thing that makes all of this work. And if we think about, we've heard about people being supported by people from institutions in the community, with all that culture that they bring, they don't understand the importance of connection, because connection is about human to human, and it's about sharing fishing, it's about supporting the right football team or the wrong football team, it's about doing things that work so that you can build a relationship that means that you can provide that kind of level of support. There's loads more I could say. I've run out of time. There's a QR code if people want to find out more, and I'm very happy to share more stories, reports, anything that people are as interested in. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. I think one of the lines that you said to us the other day was that institutions are often used when society has failed people. And I think coming back to this idea of respect and honouring and accepting people for how they are is a really, really positive message. But it also speaks to what I opened today with, of this the power of stories and more positive framing for what the right support can do. So thank you. We have about 10 minutes for questions. I recognise that Nico had something that he wanted to contribute. Is that still the case?
It was about the previous session, so.
Okay. Okay. In that case, there's Lukash at the back.
Hello. I hope. I have two suggestions. first is thank for very, very inspirative and wonderful sleepy speeches, because it was so low even for me who hear very, very well. And second, thank you very much for using and promoting new technology to bear all info about contacts, because QR codes, I don't know where they are. And I don't know, that's more or less that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Those are some things that we can bear in mind for future sessions. Thank you. Were there any questions or comments for the panelists?
Hello. Is it working? No.
Yeah.
Hello. My name is Łukasz from Poland. I have a question for whoever from the panelists may take it, because it is obvious that during that session we are concentrating ourselves on the institution. But I'm strongly convinced that we should remember that also the families can act in an institutional way. That means that they acting against the freedom of will. They are doing some acts of physical or economical or psychical violence. So my question is, as a disability community, what can we do to support those people who are with their families, but they express violence from their families? Thank you very much.
Can I answer? Please. Thank you for your question. I believe that the institutionalization in institutions and the institutionalization that happens in the families are linked to each other. The fact that people are not yet DI'd all over Europe and all over the world is because disabled persons themselves are not interested on DI. They believe that the persons in institutions are more impaired than themselves, and that they are less worthy. If the DI happens, then more services will be established in our communities, and these services will be used for all of us, even for the ones that are institutionalized in families. This is the reason that people are abused in families, because there are no services to support them. So I believe that this should happen simultaneously to be successful.
Thank you. Simone, did you have something you wanted to add?
A couple of things to say. If it's obviously within the family setting itself, then it is around the lack of support that people have in the community, and it is for us. And I think for us it's about, getting to the voice that isn't heard. So that obviously includes disabled children under 18. What are we doing as a movement to work with disabled children and their families to ensure that they get the support that they need? Because we are, to a certain extent, good at getting support for ourselves as adults, but what are we doing as a community to support families? I also think that in the UK, the one thing that parents don't agree with disabled people on a lot of things in the UK, but one thing that is very prominent is that most parents, even ones that have had through segregated education, things like that, absolutely do not believe in hospitalisation. That is about the one thing I think we all agree on. But unfortunately for us in the UK, I would like to find a way where there is agreement that parents understand what their role is within the space of working with disabled people. And one of the biggest challenges we have in the UK is a lot of parents see themselves as very distinct from disabled people, even though we might want the same thing. So exactly like the 3 Hour People campaign, actually, if you looked at they are very similar in terms of campaigns and the ultimate goal, but it's where that voice is located. And in the UK, I think there is some work to be done, but I think at the moment we're focusing on getting our voice strong and heard. But there will be a point where, if we're realistic and say, well, actually, we will need a much stronger mandate from a wider range of places and organisations and stakeholders for us to actually nail deinstitutionalisation. But it needs to really start from really understanding, that parents have a role to play, but who takes the lead in that campaign in terms of ensuring it's led by the people that are most affected by it.
Thank you. I'm as we close the session now, I'm minded of a conversation that I had with Nadia on the first evening of the Freedom Drive for us this year, and she said, the amount of education and support and guidance that people in institutions need, it will take years, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't work with people to show them that a better life is possible, because if they are of the view that they deserve to be in institutions, then we have failed them. Now, I recognize that that is a very somber note to end a panel session on. So I want you to, as you leave this session today, I want you to think about some of the stories that you've heard and the lives that have been changed by real positive support, and that idea of listening and honouring and accepting people as they are. And also, on a less and slightly more practical note, if you've not signed the participant list, please do so during the break. And thank you so much to all of my panelists and Jamie, and have a lovely lunch break. We'll see you back at 1:30. No worries.